Lone Pine, California, a community in the beautiful Owens Valley along Highway 395 with about 2,000 residences, has a long and beautiful history that we're going to learn about in this upcoming episode. Good morning. Today we're going to take a trip up to an area known as Lone Pine, California. It's along Highway 395 in Owens Valley. It was established in the 1860s, but it became an important supply town for the surrounding mountains and mines nearby in the 1870s. It's a living town. There's people in it right now, but it's got a long history that's very interesting and compelling. So that's why I decided to make a video on that. Got my coffee for the travel. Let's go do some exploring and make a video. Explorers had come near or into the Owens Valley as early as the 1820s, with Jedediah Smith being credited by many authorities to be the earliest. Captain Joseph Rutherford Walker entered the valley in 1833, guiding part of a Joseph Charles Company, which had begun in Independence, Missouri. It was in 1845 that the Pathfinder John C. Fremont hired Walker and Richard Owens. It was Fremont who named the valley, the lake, and the river after Owens. A report written by Deputy U.S. Surveyor A.W. Von Schmidt, dated September 15, 1855, stated in part that it was land entirely worthless with few exceptions. Prospectors had left the Comstock, Monaville, and Aurora areas looking for new claims. Cattlemen such as A. Van Fleet came to Lone Pine and probably built the first permanent building, perhaps sometime in the early 1860s. Paiute and Shoshone residents had been living in the Owens Valley for thousands of years and already had family groups living in many of the areas. In the late 1850s and early 1860s, there were newspaper reports of many skirmishes between the white settlers and the Native American Indians. Camp Independence, near the town site, was established with 157 soldiers brought to the area by Colonel George C. Evans from Fort Latman between L.A. and Santa Monica. The fort at Camp Independence was abandoned in the summer of 1863 when Native American hostilities appeared to have ended. Settlers were very unhappy about closing this fort and campaigned, perhaps exaggerating the Indian problem by word of mouth. The fort was reestablished 2 years later and remained until 1877. Prospecting had been the main purpose of the immigrants from across the Sierra prior to 1861, but a new factor, the stockman, was about to enter into the Owens Valley affairs. Some livestock had been driven through on the way to the mining camps to the north, and the drovers noted the fine grazing possibilities. While many of the towns associated with mining discoveries appeared overnight and were gone when the minerals petered out, Lone Pine had staying power. The first center of commerce there was the Mason store, opened in 1869. Mason was an important early family to Lone Pine. Charles Mason bought property on Main Street from Ann Hepner. He paid $600 for the adobe structure on December 18 of 1869. Family was attracted to the area because of the news of Cerro Gordo. Sadly, the store was destroyed in the earthquake of 1872, and Charles' 11-year-old daughter Alice was killed. This was one of the first structures rebuilt after the devastating earthquake. This time it was constructed of lumber. That original adobe wall can still be seen today. There were about 100 people living in Lone Pine in simple adobe dwellings in 1872. Tragically, 1/4 of them were killed on the night of March 26, 1872 at 2:30 in the morning. The Great Earthquake of 1872 hit with such force that the courthouse in Independence was destroyed, as were most all the houses and barns in Lone Pine. 29 people died in Lone Pine that day. In addition to the individual grave sites, there was about 14 victims that are interred in a common grave enclosed by this fence. This photo is showing the Lone Pine Fault Scarp. The earthquake resulted from sudden vertical movement of 15 to 20 feet and a right lateral movement of 35 to 40 feet on the Lone Pine Fault and part of the Owens Valley Fault. These faults are part of a twin system of normal faults that run along the base of two parallel mountain ranges, the Sierra Nevada on the west and the Inyo Mountains on the east of the Owens Valley. This scarp fault can be seen for about 85 miles, starting just north of Big Pine and running about 30 miles south of Lone Pine. Lake Diaz was also formed by the 1872 Lone Pine earthquake, when about 18 miles of the Owens Valley dropped approximately 20 feet, and a new spring opened up, causing water to fill this lowland. The lake was named for the Diaz family, who established a ranch here when brothers Rafael and Elanto Diaz immigrated from Chile in 1860s. They owned and operated a successful cattle ranch until the land was sold to the city of Los Angeles. Lone Pine had several attributes on which to base the economy of the area. It had minerals from the earth, water from the Sierra, with the streams flowing into Owens River and Owens Lake, and beautiful natural land for fishing, hunting, hiking, and filming. The town fathers and local entrepreneurs have used all of these methods to keep the little town fighting for its existence. A major force in establishing Lone Pine was the city of Los Angeles. If Cerro Gordo bullion was a major factor in starting the city, then the water from the area was a major factor in growing LA to the giant metropolis it is today. The relationship was usually one-sided, first with all the riches going south, and then with all the water flowing through the engineering feet of the 200-mile Los Angeles aqueduct to the San Fernando Valley. This relationship has been stormy over the years. There's been periods of peace and mutual advantage, and often anger and even violence has forced the two combatants to law enforcement and the mediation of the courts. So it remains today, as the people of the valley have relied on the courts to force the LA Department of Water and Power to fulfill its promise of putting water back in the lower Owens River. Mitigation of the dust and the environmental harm of taking the water out of Owens Lake has run to almost $500 million, and it is still going on. Bringing water to LA from the Owens Valley was the dream of William Mulholland, Fred Eaton, and J.P. Lippincott. It was not all bad for Lone Pine and the Owens Valley. The building of the aqueduct forced the building of a railroad, the upgrading of roads, the creation of infrastructure, and the bringing of electricity to Lone Pine relatively early. However, comparing the land around Lone Pine before the aqueduct and after points just how devastating the effects have been. The city of Los Angeles began buying land and corresponding water rights in the Owens Valley in 1905. In 1913, the Great Los Angeles Aqueduct was completed to bring Owens Valley water to the city. In 1923, the city of Los Angeles began acquiring more land in the Owens Valley to gain further sources of water. To protest the failure of Los Angeles to address their grievances, Owens Valley farmers and ranchers, under the leadership of Bishop California banker Mark Watterson, seized the Alabama gates on November 16, 1924. The gates divert water to a spillway, allowing water to flow to the lower Owens River, which leads to the now dry Owens Lake. After townspeople from Bishop joined the occupation, the number of occupiers reached 700. It lasted until November 20 and brought both national and international press coverage to the plight of the Owens Valley residences. The occupation and resulting favorable publicity did nothing to halt the city of Los Angeles's continued acquisition and subsequent control of land in the valley. Owens Valley residences came together in an attempt to negotiate with the city. Those attempts stalled and worse still, Los Angeles went on further offensive. In May of 1924, the city filed a lawsuit against a lengthy list of individual farmers, claiming that they were the ones diverting water which belonged to the city. Failed by the law, several dozen Owens Valley residences took it into their own hands. In the early hours of Sunday, May 21, 1924, they bombed a stretch of the Los Angeles Aqueduct near the town of Lone Pine. The explosion marked the opening salvo of what came to be called California's Little Civil War. Between 1924 and 1931, a local newspaper recorded 11 separate attacks on the aqueduct. The aqueduct's vulnerability strengthened the city's resolve to consolidate its Owens Valley holdings. By the end of 1926, after another round of buyouts, Los Angeles controlled 90% of the valley's land and water. In this next series of photos, I'm showing what the LA aqueduct looked like today, and in some cases comparing those same photos with the historic photos. Filming had come to Lone Pine. Through the present day, feature filming would return to the area nearly 400 times, with countless commercials, documentaries, and television shows. In addition, so popular did the location of Lone Pine and its environs prove to be that by fall of 1920, a new company was on location, staying in tents because of the lack of enough rooms in town. By 1923, Walter Dow had built its hotel to accommodate the industry that would make the area familiar to Western film fans around the world. Originally, the hotel had about 20 rooms and one apartment for the manager. The front porch gave a magnificent view of the Sierra with Mount Whitney in the central attraction. Rooms were added in 1959, and a third expansion was done in 1963. All three of the original motel sections have had major reconstruction and beautification. Showing you this picture right here, because you can see on the right side is the old Santa Rosa Catholic Church, has since been moved from its location shown here on Main Street to its current location on East Locust Street. I don't have any dates of when the Santa Rosa Catholic Church was first established in Lone Pine, California, but I thought this series of photos was very interesting, showing the transition of the church. I really enjoyed my time in Lone Pine, and the surrounding beauty is just undescribable. Here's a few photos of the Alabama Hills. You can understand why the movie industry was so excited to use this as backdrop for so many movies. And of course, driving around town looking at some of the old buildings, you can get a really good sense of the history of Lone Pine. Lone Pine, California, along the Highway 395, the eastern side of the Sierras. Passed through there a number of times over the years when I was a kid, going camping up there with my dad. Never really spent any time there. We just always passed through. Never took the time to study the history, understanding that that city was founded and kind of created and established somewhere in the 1860s, which was quite some time ago, and a lot of history since there. Gave me a new appreciation for that place. I spent the last 2 days wandering around and researching the history and looking back at some of the old buildings and appreciating the area. So beautiful. Hot, dry, and windy during the summer months and very cold during the winter. Spent a little bit of time in the Alabama Hills as well. Also a very famous place that really created a backdrop and background for a lot of movies that were created, Western movies that were created in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and television shows along with it. It's a beautiful place. And then, of course, you have Mount Whitney in the backdrop there, portal to Mount Whitney, the highest elevation mountain in the lower 48 at 14,505. But from this time forward, anytime I go through Lone Pine, it's going to bring back an appreciation of the beautiful history that exists there. And I'm going to feel a little bit closer to that place now that I did some study and research and drove around town and really had a great time. If there's anything else I can leave you guys with, just get out and explore your neighborhood, explore your city, try to figure out where some of the names of the parks came from. Anyhow, enjoy the history. Hey, thanks for watching and see you next time.